All right. Well, welcome back to this summit, kind of diving deep into how this coronavirus situation has affected the church over this amount of time while we're actually still in a stay-at-home situation. But then also kind of thinking through what the church is going to look like moving forward. And so another guest we wanted to bring on is, of course, a fellow of the Word on Fire Institute and a priest of Little Rock, Arkansas, Father Stephen Gadberry. Father Gadberry, great to have you back.
Hey, Jared, thanks. It's always a joy to talk with you personally, but any of the Word on Fire community. I just love it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I wanted to have a conversation with you as both a parish priest and then just, thinking through the culture in general. But maybe just to kind of start off, how has this situation affected your priestly ministry?
Wow. Good question. Immediately I just think of two directions to take this. First of all, priestly ministry, in the sense that most people understand it and how it affects me connecting with people. So there's the obvious things of the disconnect, the physical disconnect with the individuals of the community and also the community at large. Masses have been temporarily suspended, public masses, albeit adoration, large gatherings. So those things have been suspended. That being said, the churches have remained open, and there's been, at least here in Arkansas, and there's been a pretty steady flow of people. But so there's that disconnect there with the people. That's one area where it's affected the priestly ministry for me. But then also personally, there's a whole a slew of ways that it's affected me personally. And there's so many places. I guess we'll see what you've got in store, but where we could explore some of those. But it's as a priest, it's led me to just stop and evaluate not only my identity as a priest called to serve, but also a priest called to be in intimate communion with Christ. So it's led me to a deeper conversion personally.
One question I'd like to ask, and I know a lot of priests are now able to, they've at least set up the opportunity to live stream, et cetera, but they're still saying Mass in the actual church. And that means they're saying Mass to an empty church. And so I wanted to ask, what is that like? How does that affect you?
Wow. It's odd. It's odd. That's maybe a good word to explain it. It's just odd. It's not, it's not fun. It's not ideal, but in some ways it's just so odd. It's unique. So one of the broad takeaways that I've gotten so far, and to answer your question right now on celebrating Mass with an empty church, has, in this conversion that I've been going through in these days, has been this gentle, albeit honest and totally obvious reminder that it's not about me and it's not about the people. It's about Jesus Christ. That's what Christianity is about. That's what the whole Catholic message is about. It's about Jesus Christ. The community is the community because of Jesus Christ. It's not as if the community joins and then Christ decides to go and visit each little community. We participate in Christ himself. And so for me, it's been hard personally to celebrate Mass alone because we're called to celebrate it with the people, right? That's the reason we sacramentally why we do it, to bring it to the people. But liturgically and supernaturally, it's for the sake of Christ. It's a matter of us on earth being lifted up to heaven. So that's kind of a long answer to say it's odd, but the ray of hope in all of this is that it's, as a priest, it's drawing me back to what the Mass is about, and it's about Jesus Christ.
Wow. It's something that I think a lot of us have had an opportunity to do, and you've shared one, is kind of taking a serious time of reflection and thinking about maybe the essentials that we've taken for granted in the past, and thinking about, which ways can we move forward, kind of thinking about that reality. So what are some of the things that have really maybe hit you during this time of reflection?
Wow. A recurring theme that's been coming up over the last month and a half or so has been this whole kind of what I just mentioned. It's about Christ, but doing less and doing it better. For the last year or so, that's honestly been something that's been coming up for me personally in prayer. And so in a way, through this whole pandemic, the Lord has albeit me and my hard-headedness and stubbornness, he's saying, this is what it's about. Doing less, do it more. Moving forward, it's going to be, I think you're going to see, we could have a whole discussion on this, on what it's going to look like. But I think you're going to see a big shift in the way that priests, and I'm speaking from my own perspective, but I've also talked to a number of priests, and many of them, that they share these same sentiments, that moving forward, they're going to see a different priest. Actually, I've in the stuff I've done online, I've even told the people that I want to see different people. I don't want to see the same people. Of course, the faces are going to be the same, but I want to see different attitudes. So what I mean is priests, me, myself included, us putting priority where it needs to be put. In these days, I've had a little bit more downtime. I've been able to go out into the woods and do some work out in some property that's near the church, and I've been able to burn a bunch of unneeded, old wood and leaves and stuff. And you get these fires going, and some of them you got to focus on, and others you got to let burn. And, that image is so fitting for parish ministry. So often as a priest, I've always put so much energy on these little bitty fires that weren't really important, and it ended up burning me and burning the people out as well, instead of focusing on the bigger flames and letting the other ones just run their course.
So it sounds like what we're kind of thinking through is, as we move forward with this, given the fact that, through providence, we have been put in this moment to maybe rethink how we're catechizing, rethink how we're evangelizing, rethink maybe even the parish model itself, what it looks like to reach people today. And as you said, it's kind of getting into the essentials. What does it mean to worship Jesus? What does it mean to come together as a community to worship Jesus? And so, one thing that I wanted to ask as well is the reality of the sacramental nature of what's going on right now, the fact that there's not public masses, and how maybe we should think through moving forward. I mean, as a layperson, I can say, when lay people come back, they better come back appreciative, more respectful, more, because it's kind of the whole, you don't know what you got until it's gone type of thing, And so how has this kind of, what has this meant for you in your priesthood?
Wow. Good question. I've been kind of thinking on these various, this kind of vein of thought, beforehand, and I'm guilty of this. I'm not trying to condemn anybody. Actually, I am trying to condemn, but in a positive way that leads to conversion. Not condemn, I'm trying to convict.
Yes, sure.
And therefore hopefully lead to conversion, which I've been convicted in these days. I think there was a great mindset in the Catholic Church of understanding the sacraments as mere objects, things that we possess, we position, or we possess, we petition for, we own, we hold, we control, we use, we carry with. They're things that are within our power, instead of recognizing them as the subject that they are. The presence of Christ in the world today. So we object. I think there was a great underlying thought of us objectifying the divine nature of the sacraments. I hope going forward, and I. As you said, you don't realize what you got until it's gone. I hope that we can enter into a relationship with our Lord, with the sacraments, as one of those great instruments of that relationship. We can enter into it as a relationship with a subject, a living reality, which is God Himself. So I think that little distinction between objects versus subjects, not things that we control and possess, that we manipulate, that we determine, but rather things that we enter into a humble relationship with, because they're living realities. For example, you don't realize what you got until it's gone. That's I think about that almost every single day, and not in a mean way, but in an honest, kind of convicting way. Like, I think back on conversations I've had with people. For example, somebody complaining about the song that we sing, this entrance hymn, or the banners that we put up beside the church, or the slogan that we use in the bulletin, or the font that's on the webpage, whatever it may be. Things that in themselves took 30 minutes or 45 minutes of conversation to try to get the bigger picture. Part of my thoughts now have been, for those people, myself included, really, was it that big of a deal? Was it that big of a deal? And the fact that we were so comfortable with the sacraments that we tended to own and possess them instead of allowing ourselves to be owned and possessed by the sacraments, by Christ himself. Moving forward, I hope people had that mindset that we don't own them, we don't possess them. It's our desire. It's in our soul that we be owned and possessed by them. So entering into the mystery, that's maybe a way of putting it.
Yeah, it's almost as if the lack of the sacraments, hopefully, it causes a conviction, as you said, and a deeper longing for the Eucharist itself, and a longing for the community, a longing for a better relationship with our parish priest, a longing for, a really thriving reality. I mean, one thing that we constantly talk about at the Institute is this continuation of a rise of disaffiliation, people just leaving religion completely. And sometimes, I do wonder if part of that reality, I mean, you look at the Pew studies, it is one of the number one reasons why people leave is because people leave and nobody noticed. And so when we come back together as a community, we've kind of given, if you think about it, we're going to talk about, of course, fitness here in a little bit, as we always do, but you think about in the off season, sometimes you have opportunities to just relax, let yourself heal, and then you got to get back in the game. And maybe this is kind of an off season for us where we go kind of step back, get closer to the heart of Jesus. And then when we get back, we better get back in the game.
Yeah, catching our breath. That's I think a good way of putting all this right now. It's an opportunity for us to just catch our spiritual breath. We've been running the race instead of allowing our Lord to carry us. So just catching our breath. There's so many blessings that are going on right now for those who are open to them.
Now, thinking about some of the kind of practical steps moving forward, both for you personally, as well as maybe some thoughts about other people who work in parishes or your brother parish priests, what are some of the thoughts you have about once this restriction gets lifted? What are the things that one we can focus on, and maybe what are some of the things we can start maybe changing?
Yeah, good question. I try to keep it as simple as possible, something that keeps resonating in my heart. It's about Christ. It's not about me. It's not about the people. It's about Christ. And so everything that I do needs to point towards Christ. So often before this, I was living like a social worker. Social workers have their place. Therapists have their place. That's why it's a unique profession in itself. But I am not one. But I've been living like one. I've been trying to fix people's problems. I've been trying to fix the situations in their life and their family and their household. Even try to fix their spiritual problems, which albeit, as a priest, it seems like it would be a good thing. But I don't fix it. I take it to Christ, and I take them to Christ. I bring Christ to them. In many ways, I wasn't doing that. I think moving forward, something we need to think about is, am I doing this for Christ, or am I doing it for the other people? And so you may be thinking, well, we're called to love other people. Yeah, I get that. I agree. I don't disregard that. I don't disagree with you. But we have to love other people because of Christ, not in spite of Christ. I don't have to think, well, okay, family or person or individual, I'll fix your problem, and then once we fix it, then we can go to Christ. God doesn't want us to be prepared when we go to him. He calls us as we are, and he prepares us. He fixes us. So that's been a thought that's been going through my mind. I think moving forward, that would be some advice that I would give. Another bit of advice, I'm totally stealing this from our bishop. He said this to me before in a different conversation, before all this happened, before the pandemic, the coronavirus stuff happens. But then he said it to me again in the midst of all this. So I've talked to the bishop about making hard decisions, calling hard shots, being a shepherd, being a true pastor. And I've said, Bishop, I thank you for calling these shots. Obviously not everybody's happy. But I think overall it's for the good of the flock. It's good for our souls, yada, yada, yada. Other conversations, similar vein. And he responded by saying, the only person I have to please is Christ. And he said, I just keep reminding myself of that. I think so many of us were pleasing people more than we were pleasing Christ. And I'm number one victim of that. I'm totally guilty. I was a people pleaser. And these days, moving forward, I think these days have showed me that it's about Christ. It's not about me. It's not about you. And that sounds cold up front, but it's about Christ. So in a word, that would be my moving forward advice. Bring it to Christ. It's about Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing too, that this is kind of switching gears a little bit. Every time you and I chat, fitness and exercise and all of that comes up. And I do think that this moment has given us an even deeper awakening to the fact that keeping yourself healthy, watching what you eat, exercising, etc., it guards you against maybe an even larger or an invisible opponent like a virus or something like that. Yeah. And so a lot of people have now had even the gyms taken away from them to come to an even deeper appreciation for that. Now, how has during this time kind of fitness helped you maybe stay balanced in regard to everything going on? Maybe how has it affected your spiritual life? And then what's some maybe advice that you'd give folks that are kind of stuck at home now and how to start getting fit if they're currently struggling with it?
Wow, great question. Do less and do it better. You would think that with all this free time, I'd be working out more, but actually I've become more intentional with my working out. I've ended up taking more rest days than I typically have. Kind of started that at the beginning of Lent and after the New Year, and it was just really magnified during these days of isolation. And I feel so much better. So doing less and doing it better. So intentionality, the enemy the enemy against indifference versus intentionality. That's a key thing to keep in mind going forward. Be intentional, physically, but also spiritually. For advice for people, I'm totally stealing this from, what's the CrossFit methodology is something that they say, but it applies for anybody. Get off the couch and get off the sugars. Yeah. So move. I tell people to try to break a sweat every day. The weather, luckily, is beautiful. Like it's every day is more and more beautiful. Just get outside. Just breathe in some fresh air. It's been neat seeing the photos of places like India or Asia where you see over the course of 2 and 3 months how the landscape has changed from these smog covered cities to now you can see across the whole town. Yeah. And it's amazing. But get outside, move, and then get off the sugar. So just if it lasts more than 2 weeks in your kitchen or on your shelf and you can still eat it, you probably should not eat it. And it needs to be something, and the same thing I think could be applied to the faith. Get off the couch and get off the sugar. You've got to move. You've got to be active. God's grace is there, but you've got to open up and receive it. So do something on your part to receive God's grace, to be open to that relationship with Him. Put in the legwork on your own, to pray, to spend time, to have that conversation. So get off the couch spiritually, but then also get off the sugars spiritually. In these days of crisis, you could really call them crisis. Feel-good motivational talks won't get you through. My mom, my older sister died when she was just 11. My dad died at the same time. It was a vehicle accident. My mom, motivational talks didn't get her through that. It was a relationship with Christ. It was her faith that got her through. Spiritual sugars, taste good, but when you got to work, they burn out pretty quickly. And so you've got to have the meat and potatoes of the faith. In these days of us getting off the couch, for example, faithfully, we can do some work in the faith and spend the time to chew on the meat and potatoes of the faith. Dig deep, read the saints, read the scriptures, read the catechism. There's so much there. I guess, that's kind of a reflection on faith and fitness. Another thing is that it showed, I've been, every couple of weeks, there's a news article about a 20 or 30-year-old individual who's fit as an ox who ends up dying from the coronavirus. For me, that's been a big, kind of wake up call. And to say, well, You can only do so much, but it's not guaranteed. Your life's not guaranteed. There's that's a whole other podcast right there.
Yeah.
Faith and fitness.
Yeah, it kind of gets into the whole. I mean, one thing that I've been kind of recognizing is the whole memento mori reality of realizing that. I mean, for example, I've got a good friend of mine that he was shut up in his home, and all of a sudden he had to get an appendectomy during all of this. So it's one of those things of like, no matter what you do, death could be right around the corner. And I think that fitness helps remind you of that sometimes, that you are mortal, that you can't do things like Superman. It hurts sometimes, and sometimes you're going to fall down on the concrete and realize your lungs are going to explode, But then also on the spiritual aspect of it, if you think about that reality that we think of this virus out here, but death is at our doorstep, any time, we get in the car, it could happen then, or you could, you never know. And so it's been kind of an awakening for me, as well as kind of appreciating what fitness and faith and how they coincide and teach each other. So something too that I wanted to talk to you about is some of the reality of what's happened here is that we've kind of been forced out of our comfortable place, and Pope Francis has been calling Catholics to get out, go to the peripheries, get away from your desks, go. And in a certain sense, this forced it. In a certain sense, this made us go out. And so because of that reality, when we get back to going back to Mass at a church and coming back together as a community, what advice would you have to keep that mentality, to just keep thinking outward facing?
Yeah, I would say intentionally try to make yourself uncomfortable at least once a day in the body, mind, and spirit. Right. So body, mind, and soul. Fitness thing, try to make yourself uncomfortable at least once a day. Work out. It's not called relaxing out. It's called working out. Right. So make yourself uncomfortable mentally, intellectually, the same thing. Read something. Reading can be tedious. Study something, learn something new, do it. Make yourself uncomfortable, but also spiritually to get to the deeper heart of the question of going to the peripheries. That requires a little bit of suffering on the part of the individual who's going out. It requires them to hurt a little bit, right? True ministry doesn't begin until it starts hurting a little bit, because then then sacrifice comes in. And whenever it's a true sacrifice, then you're loving from the cross. And that's, Christ calls us to love from our poverty, not from our richness. Going out to the peripheries implies we've exhausted all of our riches. And it's at that point that we're poor. Therefore, we can meet the poor and we can love them in a poor way, which is the richest way of loving them. So what does that look like practically? Wow, that could be, there's so many things. It could be, learning something about the faith. It could be calling a friend, texting a cousin. It could be stepping outside of your comfort zone to ask somebody if they want to pray with you. And I just can't think of a ton of examples now, but because there's so many opportunities. Make yourself uncomfortable. What does that look like for you? It's different for all of us, but make yourself uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So now thinking kind of keeping in this practical vein, one thing that this has also changed is the way in which a parish currently catechizes, right? It has the ability to go out through new media. It has the ability to go out by maybe lay people learning in their own homes, like they're for the first time. Maybe like for example, I've got a daughter that was ready to receive her first communion, and that's been kind of postponed at this point. And of course we catechize in the home, but a lot of families maybe haven't before. And so what advice might you have for some of these families that are taking on that primary role for maybe the first time that they are catechizing their children, they're educating their children? Maybe what advice might you have for those folks?
Wow, this is the battle. I think that many directors of formation and evangelization and catechesis in the parishes and in the diocese are facing. How do we engage parents? As Catholics, we're so guilty of send them to Sunday school, send them to CCD, to PRE, and let church take care of it. And a lot of that comes from the parents being uncatechized, because that's kind of the environment that they grew up in. So if you think about, breaking the cycle, break the curse, that applies to so many things in life, not just like addictions for people, or personality traits or tendencies. It also applies to the faith. So parents, this is the time for you to dig deep and allow yourself to learn from the kids. So I would say set concrete goals each week. Don't just say we're going to talk about the faith each week. Make it concrete. Once a week, we will sit down and read one passage from the Gospels. Either every Saturday, we will read the Sunday Gospel for the next day. One night a week, we will read the life of one saint. One evening a week after supper, we will read one paragraph from the Catechism, or we will read one writing of a saint, or talk about a sacrament or something like that. I would say be very concrete, but and don't just. And when you're being concrete, also add a time and a date. Every Saturday, I will read the next Sunday Gospel. At least one night a week, either Tuesday or Wednesday night, every week, after supper, we will read the life of a saint. For example, I would say something that simple will have profound effects. I think moving forward, parents being proactive in the formation of their faith is it's got to continue. It's got to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question then is, and you mentioned it a little bit in the beginning of this discussion, is, maybe some of the attitude changes whenever we come back and we start coming back together as a community. What are some of the things that we really need to take very seriously in the way we re-engage all of this?
Wow, that's a good question. That's a very good question. The way I started out, it comes down to Christ. Now, what does that look like? Our relationship with Christ is all about conversion. So I think conversion would be a key thing to think about. How can the thing that I'm doing now lead to greater conversion personally and for those people around me? I would say that always bring it back to Christ, and then in light of Christ, ask yourself, how can my next action lead to a deeper conversion, personally or for the people around me? Because that's what it boils down to. Yeah.
Well, praise God, and I think that one thing that happens whenever there's a crisis of sorts, and of course this is a global crisis right now. There's always this temptation towards division. There's always this temptation towards finger pointing. There's always this temptation towards derision or disobedience, or you name it. And one thing that Bishop Barron talks about is that's the devil, right? The devil is the great divider. And so when we come back together as a community, it's an opportunity for us to show the Christian love and unification that comes from being in love with Jesus Christ as a community. And so I've mentioned this in a previous video as well, but I want to exhort our lay people. As a layman, speaking to you, a priest, I want to exhort our lay people to come back with a deep, deep, deep sense of appreciation, respect, loyalty, obedience to their parish priests, to our spiritual fathers. I think that's going to be one of the major healing points whenever we come back together. So, Father, I really appreciate this conversation. I didn't know if you had any kind of last thoughts or anything you'd like to throw out there.
Just take it one day at a time. I would like to share one little thought. As I was just before we started talking, or a little bit earlier this morning before this conversation, it just struck me the the whole respect part, not just for me as priest, but also as individuals, when we come back seeking unity. What can I do to seek unity, not division? And again, I think it boils down to us recognizing the other people as subjects, not just objects, right? They're people who we enter in a relationship with. They're not things that we control. The same is true of our faith and what's been handed on to us. It's not an object that's simply been handed on. It's a living reality that we enter into this dynamic. We receive the invitation to enter into this dynamism, this energy, which is the life of Christ, the grace of God. Keep that in mind, just the fact that it's not about you. And that's good news. That's good news. It's not about you. It's not about me. And that should be very freeing, because so often we're worried about ourselves, right? We want our plans fulfilled. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be my name, right? My kingdom come, my will be done, right? And then after my will is done, then I'll do your will. But no, your kingdom come, your will be done right here and now. Just keeping that in mind, this whole that aspect of entering into the relationship and respecting the mystery that's in front of you, whether that mystery be Christ in the Eucharist, Christ in confession, whether that mystery be in the person of your priest who is broken just like you, but also who's really honestly, he's trying to do the best that he can. He doesn't just sit at the rectory and think about things that he can do to make your life worse, right? He's genuinely trying to do his best. So respecting the mystery in him, but also your fellow parishioners too. That family that sits in the third pew on the left side that you can't stand. Maybe consider that there's a little bit more to their story than what you see. The book is still being written, right? And so chapters are still being written in their lives and also in yours. And what a joy that God allows us to be part of this story.
Wow. All right. Well, Father Gadberry, it's always great chatting with you. And every time we talk, it seems like time just flies. So I truly appreciate your time, and we appreciate you as a fellow of the Institute. And of course, I'm sure we'll continue this conversation as we keep going. So again, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. God bless you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. And be sure to check out all the other videos in this summit as we dive through what this moment means for the church. This is really an important moment in the life of the church and the life of our own individual souls, of what is God doing for us and with us during this time. So be sure to check out the other summit videos, and we'd love to hear from you. And God bless.